Mr Howard says he understands the frustration of rural communities and is already working on issues like bank closures through the introduction of rural transaction centres. He also put the sale of Telstra back in the spotlight, suggesting some of the billions of dollars tied up in the company could go into funding regional infrastructure projects. Angela Tackett's National 9 News.
Federal government documents have revealed the full extent of the GST, with driver's licences, pet registrations and land assessments to be taxed for the first time. The papers were issued to the New South Wales government and indicate building approvals and school material levies will also be affected by the tax. The revelations follow claims some insurance companies are raising premiums and blaming the increase on the GST. Hundreds of consumers have made complaints about recent price hikes within the insurance sector. The ACCC is investigating and says companies face fines of up to $10 million if they are found guilty. Police say bikie gang warfare could be behind a shooting in southern New South Wales last night. A 36-year-old motorcyclist is in a critical condition in hospital after he was shot in the chest. Police believe the man was riding his bike down a highway at the time of the shooting and are questioning several people over the incident. More teacher strikes across New South Wales this week as thousands of students return to school. A stop work meeting will be held on Thursday morning, lasting for up to 2 hours. It will determine whether further industrial action will go ahead. Teachers say staff shortages must be addressed. It's believed more than 50 primary and high schools across the state are still struggling to find teachers as the school year begins. Financial markets are set for a rough morning after spectacular falls over the weekend. Our dollar is trading at 63.71 US cents. The Dow plunged 289 points. Nasdaq lost 152. Gold is nearly $4 cheaper and oil slipped 10 cents. Australia has again proved invincible in the one-day arena, defeating India by 4 wickets in Perth. The tourists fare well the Tri-Series tournament, making 226. Rahul Dravid their best. Mark Waugh and Michael Bevan starred with the bat, the Aussies reaching the target in the final over.
Chasing 227, Mark Waugh flew out of the gates.
That's a good shot.
Australia's form so spectacular, the last thing India wanted was a bigger ball to bowl to them. Gilchrist the first to go on 6.
They don't go too quickly on that side.
Waugh batted on.
Great shot, is it?
A mass blow-up in the bleachers. Inspiring Ponting.
Oh, beautifully played.
Waugh fell for 40.
Got him. Yes, he has. He's got a wicket.
Bevan's form first class.
That's hit very hard.
Ponting departing on 33.
Straight down the ground. Or is it? No, he hasn't quite middled it. This will be out caught. Yes, he's...
His timing unfortunate. When play resumed, Bevan made up for lost time.
It'll bring up Michael Bevan's half-century.
Tendulkar going to extremes to stop him on 71.
Tendulkar diving away to his...
Steve Waugh made 19 before losing his stumps. Australia 5 for 201. 4 runs later, Shane Lee followed.
Got to be a good chance.
Damien Martin showing off at home.
And there's the danger.
Upstaged by Shane Warne.
Hasn't mishit that.
The spinner returning from injury with 16 from 10 balls, including the winning runs.
Wins it for Australia.
Australia home by 6 wickets. They're in Melbourne tonight for the presentation of the inaugural Allan Border Medal before facing Pakistan in the opening one-day final on Wednesday at the MCG. Dave Carlson, National 9 News.
World number 1 Andre Agassi has won his 2nd Australian Open title, coming from a set down to defeat defending champion and 2nd seed Yevgeny Kafelnikov in 4. The match was marred by an on-court intruder identified as the same person who'd previously disrupted 5 other major events in Australia. Agassi put the disturbance behind him to run away with the championship.
The championship belongs to Agassi.
It was the American's 6th Grand Slam title. Trace, that's it from me, but before I go, let me say a big thank you to Peter Overton for the sterling effort he put in while I was away.
Oh, well, that's excellent. And I should thank Ali Moore and Rachel Friend.
That just about covers all
I think we've
bases,
covered everybody now, Roscoe. Thanks.
Yeah.
Does that mean I'm forced to thank Roscoe?
Hello, Mont.
I think that's probably
in
the
lieu
right thing.
of Peter, who
back?
did the... So the A-team's back together?
The A-team is back, ready for a new year.
We'd like to think so, that we're the A-team.
Morning, Mont.
Good morning to you. And this is the weather that greets us, regardless of who I have to thank for covering the weather for the last month or so. I think the newsroom have been covering it adequately. Tropical cyclone Kirrily sitting out here well off the coast and deteriorating over the next 12 to 24 hours. Otherwise, there is a surface trough and a mid-level trough causing general instability through Western Australia. You can see the trough dipping down and a fair bit of cloud associated with that, a little bit through the tropics, but you can see not a lot of clouds there, so there's not too many storm cells, and there's a bit of a trough through the interior parts of the eastern states as well, along with a pair of high pressure systems which have joined forces over the southeastern parts, so should be predominantly fine weather for the southeastern states, namely Victoria, or at least most of Victoria. I believe there's a bit of instability in the eastern ranges, and most of Tasmania and South Australia should be fine today. Rainfall distribution map will give us an idea of the spread, probably more than is indicated here through Western Australia. Not heavy stuff, but more widely distributed. It's really only the eastern interior fine at the moment, and will clear up down the western flank later on. Otherwise, a little bit through the tropics, as I mentioned, down the coast of Queensland, a little bit through the interior parts of Queensland associated with that trough I marked, pointed out to you, and then down the ranges of New South Wales, extending into the eastern ranges of Victoria, and a little bit around the southern parts of Tasmania, sneaking into the east later on. Capital cities. So yeah, you slip back into this without even knowing what you're up to. Capital city, a little bit of instability. Canberra, a late storm possible, and well, a little bit early and perhaps a little bit late for Hobart as well. The remainder don't look too bad, although showers expected for Brisbane, and a late storm due for Darwin. The rest self-explanatory. That's all for now, but I'll be back in half an hour with a more detailed look at the weather, Steve, if I can remember the sequence.
Very good. The newsroom just rang me and said they thought they'd covered the weather more than adequately, but that's for another day. Thank you, Mont.
Well, we'll talk about that in half an hour.
We will. Now to events that occurred 13 months ago. That's when 5 volunteer firefighters died in a bushfire at Linton in Western Victoria. Details of how they died are to be presented at a coroner's inquest, but in the meantime, serious allegations have now been made about that incident. A report that appeared in yesterday's Herald Sun newspaper suggests that the men died after they were not warned about a wind change, that they had poor quality photocopied maps, and that they had insufficient training. Joining us now in Melbourne is Peter Marshall. He's from the United Firefighters Union. Mr. Marshall, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
Do you regret that these claims have come out now ahead of the coroner's inquest?
No, not at all. I mean, the reality is that it was only 4 or 5 months ago that you had the Country Fire Authority public release their own findings in relation to this particular fire. And look, what came out yesterday is well known around the fire stations. It's certainly a different version to what has been put by the CFA. And I think that indeed the firefighters had a right to know, but ensure the public do too.
The CFA is saying that these claims irresponsibly preempt the inquest and that they're part of a campaign by your union to undermine confidence in the CFA. Have you got an answer to that?
Oh, I have. Look, it does not surprise me. We've had to deal with red herring after red herring from the CFA. They will do anything other than address the issue. I mean, this is just a continuance of the problems that have been experienced in relation to public safety, firefighter safety, and indeed career officer and volunteer firefighter safety. We've had inquiry after inquiry. We've had a full parliamentary inquiry here in 1993. This is an organisation who believes that they're above any outside scrutiny, is reluctant to accept recommendations from a third party, and indeed it seems to me it's a case of we'll wait and get over this hurdle and then we'll just pretend as if nothing happened.
OK, so because of all of that, did your union leak the witness statements? Are you behind this?
The union did not leak the witness statements. The reality is that there's lots of fire stations who know all about what's actually happened at Linton. It's common knowledge. And if I could say that, part of the reason that there's a fair bit of resentment out in the fire stations is because of the fact that the firefighters know what happened up at Linton, and it's a very different version to what's being put by the CFA. Look, no apologies for the issues we've raised in relation to public safety. If it prevents any further loss of life, good and well. But I think for that to occur, there has to be a full parliamentary inquiry or indeed a royal commission.
So you're not satisfied with a coronial inquest?
The coronial inquest is looking at this particular fire up at Linton. The problems are broader. I have over 200 computer records of problems with response times, in particular in the growth corridors of Melbourne. whereas the CFA has been unable to get a crew to respond to a fire, or there has been significant delays.
Well, the
There is
CFA,
also...
in fairness, I must say, the examples that were cited in the Herald Sun yesterday, they have discredited.
Oh, well, yeah, all good and well. They actually produced a précis, is my understanding. These are documented computer records with the chronological events of order actually spelled out from the computer system that dispatches the appliances. They don't tell lies.
But
I understand that there was no supporting documentation to back up their claims of disputing what those calls were. But apart from that, Steve, it is not an isolated problem. I will go into the office today and there will be more problems with responses from the CFA, in particular in the buffer zone.
OK, but to finish where we started this morning, are you saying that those 5 lives were lost in Linton 13 months ago because the CFA would not address issues like command, control, resources and funding?
What I am saying is the coroner will decide that, Steve, but what I will say, and I'll say it quite clearly, that this organisation needs to have a long, hard look at itself in relation to not only how these deaths happen, but indeed the Dandenong fires, and indeed have a look at the problems were identified in 1985, 1993 and 1997. They need to act upon recommendations from a third party, meaning a public bodies review inquiry or indeed a coroner. This organisation thinks it's above public scrutiny because it hides behind the goodwill of volunteers. Okay. Steve, if I could just say this, it's not about the volunteers. They do an extremely good job. They are voicing the same concerns as we are. OK,
thanks for your time this morning.
Good on you, Steve.
Peter Marshall in Melbourne. Well, we've watched Australia's salmon and chicken industries fight against imports because of the fear of disease. Now, our grape growers are facing the prospect of table grapes being imported from California, perhaps as soon as July this year. Australian Table Grape Association President Brian Woodford joins me now from Mildura. Mr Woodford, good morning.
Morning, Tracy.
Is disease your main concern about this, or is it market competition?
No, I think disease is probably our biggest concern at this stage.
Because Aquis seems reasonably confident it can eliminate the risk of disease by spraying these grapes before they leave the US.
Well, they're saying that it can be fumigated in the US, and then a second option is to fumigate it with methyl bromide in arrival in Australia.
So, what's wrong with that?
Well, methyl bromide is a severe ozone depleter and will be phased out in industrialised countries by January 2001. And we believe that it is not the best form of protection against pests and diseases coming into the country.
But presumably there must be an alternative. I mean, once this methyl bromide is phased out, there'll be something else phased in.
Well, there may well be, but we don't believe that fumigation of the grapes in the way that they will be packed is going to eliminate the pest and diseases coming in.
Why is that?
Well, they're packing them in plastic bags, and we don't see that the fumigant can get into the plastic bags and control some of these exotic pests and diseases that they have in the states that we don't have here.
We are told that the plan is to import the grapes into Australia during the off-season, the off-growing season in Australia. So, therefore, this move shouldn't really encroach on your market, should it?
Well, to me, that sort of raises a few questions, because Aquis have said they'll allow the importation into the ports of Adelaide, Sydney and Melbourne between June and September, when our vines are dormant in this part of the country, in the Murray Valley. Now, to me, that just seems to be that they're not sure and can't guarantee that some of these pests and diseases won't be in the fruit and get through.
You're also worried about the thin end of the wedge, aren't you? That Chile and South America will follow next if California gets an in, and that their growing times are the same as ours, isn't that right?
Well, certainly if the US are granted access, which they have been, Chile have applied with an import risk analysis, and I think that would be approved also. But the other concerns that we have, other than the financial decline of some table grape growers in the Murray Valley, would be that the wine industry and the dried fruit industry would also be affected with some of the diseases, such as Pierce's disease and phylloxera.
All right, well, you're obviously making representations on this issue. On another, on a more broad rural issue, if I might say, the Prime Minister is touring rural areas this week. Do those trips work? Is that enough?
Well, the Prime Minister spoke with a very large table grape grower from Burke yesterday, and hopefully the message was put across to the Prime Minister, and he takes on board some of the issues. I spoke with John Anderson last week when he was in Mildura, and raised the issue with him also.
Does it impress rural people, though, that the Prime Minister visits personally and undertakes these sorts of tours?
Oh, certainly. I think it's great that politicians take the time to come to rural Australia. We have a lot to offer, and it's good to show them the real grassroots of feeding the nation.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time.
OK, thanks, Tracy.
And that's Brian Woodford in Mildura. Coming up next, the weekend in sport.
Well, I won't say welcome back like those television sports broadcasters. I'm always amused by that because the viewer never goes anywhere. It's the commentator who takes a break. Anyway, here we are again. It's a bit like 1999 revisited. 342 people got the boot at a textile factory in New South Wales last week. And now we find that they're only going to get half their $7 million redundancy entitlements and to be paid in 4 instalments, and they won't get the first payment for 15 months. We've been here before. President Clinton addressed the world at that 30th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, invitation only. 1,000 senior executives and 33 heads of state in Switzerland at the weekend. He was persuasive. He argued the case for trade liberalisation, or in language we understand, free trade. No barriers. The world is one big market. And he said how important imports were. Well, these poor coots in New South Wales failed to win a New South Wales government contract to make police shirts, and a major client relocated to Fiji where labour was cheaper, and they lost an import enhancement scheme. And Bill Clinton says, well, this is the price you pay for cutting tariffs and free trade, except the same Bill Clinton provides $8.7 billion in aid to the American agricultural sector. Remember the lamb exports issue? Well, sheep producers in America have been given $160 million additional assistance to improve their competitiveness in global markets. I'm just saying, if it's good enough for Bill Clinton to look after Americans, why aren't we looking after textile workers in New South Wales? I'm Alan Jones.